So what I thought this session we might just look at some experiments I've done. So it again brings it just into, plants and what's real. And, this is this picture we've just looked at, and I've just expanded that out into this picture. And so it's a picture of the world activities, and these are the layers that we have to come across internally. So it's just the same: spirit, astral, etheric, physical. And then this is the duality phase, and then the earth. So in a way, what we're looking at is just how we're moving these four things around. Okay, that's the game that we're playing here. And we'll just have a look at a few different things. Now, I'm not quite sure what page that is for you, but we should just have a 37. We should just have a quick look at this picture because it's again a reference on all these preparations, and so for me it's a fairly linear picture. That in a sense we're starting with the earth down here. We're moving through the etheric, we're coming into the astral, and up here is the spirit, okay? And so that's mirrored in these planets. Here's the inner planets here, here's the outer planets here. And, as I say, if you wanted to look just at a moon activity, it's actually quite an expansive growth process, but the oak bark preparation is actually limiting that. So it's in some ways the opposite of that. So these preparations are quite specific. So what I'm saying here is Steiner's not following a sort of sequential pattern. He's altering each of these stages. So the problem that he's describing with the oak bark is too much etheric, too much moon. And so he doesn't want to stimulate more moon, he actually wants to moderate the moon, you see? And so that's what he's doing with this oak bark. So he's drawing this etheric into the earth. And then when we're coming to the chamomile preparation, he's actually wanting to stimulate the etheric. Now, chamomile's known for digestive problems, yeah? And so you've got, in a sense, too much astrality. You've got the forces coming into your body, but your body can't digest them. And so all of that sort of astral is now a poison. It's actually causing trouble. And so what we're wanting to do is put more etheric in there. And then by putting more etheric in there, it actually helps to balance out that astrality and sort of calm down all that digestive problems. Now, the other thing that chamomile does is puts you to sleep, doesn't it? It's a sedative. And so how's that working? And so what's happening here is we've got this very strong sort of nerve sense, astral thing going on, and we can't get to sleep. So if we stimulate the etheric, it pushes that off. And by pushing off that astral, you can then sort of go to sleep. You get it out of your body and you go to sleep, you see? So this is what this chamomile preparation's doing. It stimulates this etheric activity. And that's what we were using on those drought pictures, which we'll probably come across again in a minute. We're stimulating this etheric to push off the drought. The astral's coming in, and because of that astral coming in, they're getting insect attacks taking place. And by stimulating that etheric process, we push that off. The turnips doubled in size, and the insect damage was reduced by 50%. So, that's what the chamomile's doing. It's stimulating this etheric activity. When we come to the yarrow, it's got these very indented leaves, and it's working with this sulfur process very strongly, which, as I said before, Steiner gives the image of sulfur as if it's oil. And so you've got your hydrogen, nitrogen, oxygen, and carbon, and so your four bodies, without sulfur, they get stuck. And you've actually got autism. And when you put in sulfur, it actually allows those bodies to work. And if you've got too much sulphur, you've got hysteria. The bodies can't stick. And so you've got this sort of whoosh, 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 whoosh thing going on. And so this sulphur is this oil. So it actually facilitates process. And so what we see with yarrow is that it's actually opening this etheric process up for the astral to come in. And it's quite fascinating. Steiner talks about in the medical lectures these various illnesses that occur because the astral can't get into the etheric. The physical and the etheric sort of form a little bond and the astral can't get in. So there's no sort of stimulation and activation. And so you've got to open that up so that the astral can enter. And in a sense, that's the image of the yarrow preparation. And we're talking about that with regards to the stag's bladder. And you remember that story about the stag, how this metabolic process is sort of going out and it's becoming, in a sense, quite psychic. And the kidney that we were talking about processing all this astrality. And this is why we're using this sulphur preparation into the kidneys to help with this process and digestion of the astral, so that we're able to bring that into the plant, into any process. Now, when we come to Mars, that's an interesting one because Mars is sort of quite feisty. You know, it's the warrior, so it's actually, you know, pushing, and in a sense governs the astrality, and in a way, a true Mars plant is something like, you know, once you start going into rosemary and those plants with thorns and so on, you know, like gorse, that's all Mars, these thorns on plants. And so this astral process is quite a stimulating thing. And as I said, arsenic, for example, is an astral stimulant. And so, of course, astral stimulants start leading to hallucination and all sorts of, you know, drug-like effects. Now, stinging nettle doesn't do that. Stinging nettle is growing in between light and moisture. So the stinging nettle that he's suggesting is the perennial nettle, not the annual one that grows in quite harsh, dry under trees and things like that. It's the nettle that actually grows by rivers in a shady environment. Quite often it's in some sort of a dip where moisture is holding. And you've got a very active root growth that, of course, works well with the humus and so on. But the leaves are quite large, and yes, it has uric acid and so on. But the point is it's living in this sort of shady environment. So it sort of mediates this light and moisture sphere. And so what he's actually using the nettle for is not to stimulate the astrality, but to calm the astral down. And the whole of the agriculture course can be looked at as controlling nitrogen. That's the sort of underlying theme that's sort of dotted through this thing, is that, of course, nitrogen causes poison. You've got protein and it starts to degenerate, the nitrogen, you know, the oxygen leaves and you're left with carbon and nitrogen, which is cyanide. And so this is the poisoning that can easily take place, and that's this sort of wayward astrality. And so his whole point is, of course, a wayward astrality starts drawing in insects as well, in on that astrality. So he sort of sees that the whole process is to stabilise nitrogen. How do we slow it down? How do we anchor it? How do we hold it in? And this is a big part about the composting process. You know, how do we hold that degeneration in a way that it doesn't go sour and cause rotting? And so he's using the stinging nettle to actually calm down the astrality, not to stimulate it. And so it's helping to integrate this chaotic astrality. Now, when we come to the... Yep.
Have we got plants with prickles, spikes, spines, etc.?
Yeah.
How are we sort of classifying? Can we use biodynamic preparations to help balance the energies to make it less favourable for those kinds of things?
So when you're looking at these spiky plants, you're really looking at an active astral process. You know, those leaf, you know, the plant leaf, and you could see how they got more spiky the more they went up the stem. Remember that picture? And it's like that incarnating process just goes to an extreme, and those leaves turn into spikes. You know, that's the imagination, that it's just such a strong light process that it sort of turns into a spike. And so wherever you see those, you're looking at this overly astral, overly light, warmth process. So we've got to bring in the moisture. And again, you know, you do your physical things like mulching and watering and leave your grass a bit longer and all that sort of stuff. But this is really where the etheric, where the 500, there's the chamomile, and to some degree the yarrow would be the preparation that you would tend to use more of in those environments. I'd be inclined, like the humus preparation is an interesting thing. You know, what is humus? And you know, ideally it's a clay humus compound that we're working, not just organic matter. And so I went into a forest and sort of dug down a bit and sort of, you know, tried to get organic matter that had been processed quite a lot. And so trying to get this sort of black, you know, almost gelatinous sort of organic matter that you're finding in there. And I sort of wonder about earthworm casts, by the way. You know, you must notice that it's just like 500, isn't it? You know, earthworm casts. I haven't really done any experiment with it, but it's that question of, is that a humus that we could use for this humus preparation? But as I say, the one I made, I got out of a forest to try and get this old humus. And that would be something that I would add in to bring that humus process into the game. Yeah, but that's to me what it's saying. It's too much light and warmth. You're also, lack of humus in the soil, which then comes back to soil structure and you know, brings us back to this hard magnesium sort of soil. I'd sort of be really interested to see what happened with sand in these magnesium soils, because of course silica sand facilitates electrical flow. I think we have to bring that into this equation, that when we're putting sand into the soil, it's not just aerating, but it's allowing electrical flow to take place. And that, of course, then starts feeding your soil biology and all that sort of carry on. And as I say, our soil's just, it's just really responded incredibly well to this little bit of... Same, same sort of process. It is essentially the same. That's right. It's a silica sand process. But it's that paramagnetic sort of flow. Now, we've got a guy in New Zealand called Ewan Campbell, Eco Farm, I think he's called himself. And he's big on this silica sand. And he talks about silica hydroxide is what he thinks he's getting out of a particular sand deposit somewhere in New Zealand there. And of course that hydroxide makes the silica that much more available. And so that's essentially what he's doing. And he, you know, puts an altimeter in the ground, you know, and shows the electrical flow that's taking place from east to west. And you know, he puts his product on and that flow picks up so many volts. And, you know, that means there's more... I think it's called electrolysis, isn't it? The basic process.
Paramagnetic energy?
Sorry?
Paramagnetic energy in some of the basalt rocks?
Yeah, but there is just this physical electrolysis process that takes place, that the more electrical current you get, the more elements are sort of flowing into the system.
So through a soil test, that would measure your electrical conductivity?
Yeah, I think so, yeah. And Yeah, and that's the sort of basis of his story. The more flow we can get going, the more the plants can grow. And one of his stories I found fascinating was the closer to the poles you go, you get these sort of long days, 11 o'clock at night, the sun's going down. And he's saying even though it's cold, the amount of grass growth that's going on down there is enormous. And he's just saying, well, we're getting closer to the poles, so the whole electrical activity is that much stronger the closer we go to the poles. And so, he was in Ireland or somewhere and he's saying it's freezing cold, but the grass is growing rampant. What's happening? And that's what sort of turned him on to it's about electrical flow, which brings us, from a biodynamic point of view, back to silica, which is facilitating this electrical flow. And as I say, he's into silica hydroxide is his big story.
That in water as well, because it's going to conduct better when it's damp as well.
Yes, sure. Yeah, which then brings us back to the humus content in the soil and all this sort of thing. So it's really about this humus management, I think, is a big one. And as I say, we've got 8% organic matter anywhere we go, whereas you guys, 2% is sort of a good deal. Yeah, that's right. So, you've got a big room to move with this, and it would be worth looking at, a humus preparation, which to some degree 500 is, but it is a metabolic product, which. So anyway, now with the dandelion, I guess the best thing to say is this valerian is working with this stimulation of the phosphorus, which helps to incarnate the spirit. It's really that blunt, that it's really this preparation that helps to incarnate the spirit, which therefore leads to a warming effect. And we've shown that, valerian can lift the internal temperature of plants by 2 degrees, which therefore has a frost protection effect. It has an early spring effect. Plants get going earlier in the spring. And that has many uses. Like if you've got a property like a vineyard on a hill, the bottom half is going to be slow because it's cold compared to the top. And if you spray that bottom half, it will catch up to the top half. So there's all these sort of really practical uses of this valerian preparation. Now, the Jupiter, I see, the dandelion, it's really pictured as this preparation that sort of contacts the cosmos and brings it into the earth and lets the plant become sort of draw to itself what it needs. And I see it as a sort of helping to get these two together and then draw it into the earth. And so this preparation together here really has a big effect on quality of fruit. It really helps to increase bricks and nutrient density. We grew these pumpkins, and I was using this preparation that had a metabolic focus in the potency, and to get the plants flowering, get them pollinating. And the pumpkins were quite large, but they were heavy, unbelievably heavy, like double the weight of what you would sort of normally expect. And it's this nutrient density that's sort of coming through these light processes that are coming this way. And I think that dandelion's quite an important part of that process. So these are the levers we've got that we can play with, that we're calming down the astrality, and this is where the equisetum helps to bring this astral and etheric together, and this helps to bring these guys together. This stimulates this earth's. So we can do a lot with this. And I think, making up a sort of preparation of that and a preparation of that with 500 and 501, you're going to do an awful lot just with those preparations. you're able to stimulate this etheric and push off this astrality. You're able to bring in your quality. And this will also have an effect on these blood things like rabbits and those sort of pests. We've actually got rid of... Well, the kangaroos left. What did we use on the kangaroos? Yeah, our bird product. And that's basically these three things. So all your mammals... and we do possums, but what's the potency? It's actually the same preparations, but different potencies. And so the possums, they're very rhythmical, aren't they? They come every night at the same time, they follow the same path, they just do the same thing, and rhythmic process. They don't have a lot of young, they only have one or two, I don't know. Whereas the metabolic beings, like a duck, it's a big body. When they don't make much of a nest, they have lots of young. Those young are ready to go right from the start, as opposed to the nerve sense birds, which are your little tweety birds that make a really fine nest. They only have 2 young. Takes a long time for them to develop, to reach, independence. And so these are the images that you can get, that, this thing is more nerve sense and this thing is more metabolic and this thing is more rhythmic, but we're still dealing with a mammal. So we're still dealing with quite a highly developed astral ego astral spirit sort of interaction. And so although we're just using those preparations, it's the potency that determines whether we're dealing with rabbits or whether we're dealing with birds or whether we're dealing with possums. And I think it was the bird one we used, and we got rid of kangaroos. He just sprayed it around the house and around the area, and the kangaroos...
Is this somewhere obviously not...
This was in Victoria. Yeah. No. Well... We actually have wallabies, and we have lots of possums, but we have no predators, so they get out of control massively.
Possums are worse over there than they are here.
Oh, massive. There's no predators, so they just go berserk. Yeah, that's what we want. Get some snakes. Okay, so this is just this sort of framework that I use for the preparations. And, here's the sand, humus, clay reference that we can bring into this. And these are the stories we will talk about tomorrow. So these are the basic reference that I will now show you some applications of. We won't worry about that at the moment. We'll go there, go there, go there. We've seen all those. So we've seen those, we've seen those, we've seen those. Now this is a really interesting little trial we did. This is in The Hague, in Holland. And actually the people that took this picture were in Holland, and they organised for me to come over and be involved in a research project because the horse chestnuts were all dying. And there's this sort of bacterial disease that's running around the place that sort of chops off the, the sap going back to the roots, stops it getting to the roots. Do you seen that? And it's widespread, and it's affecting all of the potatoes, tamarillos, but it's also affecting the elms, the horse chestnuts. And what happens is that the sort of sap pressure builds up and starts bursting out through the bark. So you get all this residue running down the side of the tree, and then that'll all die off. And because it's not feeding the roots, the plants eventually die. And so the question is, what could we do with that? How could we help that process? And so I did make up this bacterial, I call it Bacmin, I can't remember the exact formula now, but it was trying to address this bacteria, which is an astral activity that's, out of place. And at the same time, we were stimulating the etheric activity in the... so we were using our drought-busting preparation. And what happened was that we came to the autumn time, and we could only spray 2/3 of the tree. So we had a tractor and a guy with a great big wand, but these are big trees, and we could only spray this far up the tree.
Outside the window.
And so along comes autumn, and all the tops of the trees' leaves fell off, and all the sprayed area held on for another 6 weeks until we had a big frost, and then they all dropped. Now, Holland, the sort of side story here is Holland had banned homeopathy for humans. And I didn't know any of this. And so we're doing this. Now, these trees are outside the Hague Parliament buildings. So the Prime Minister's office is sitting right here, and these trees are outside his window. So he's got proof of homeopathy right outside his window. And, that you can see that line right down there. So that was a fascinating little experiment.
Why did they ban it?
Sorry?
Why did they ban it?
Fascism and fanaticism. The pharmaceutical industry doesn't.
Not returning.
I think it's still illegal. So the Dutch had to go to Germany to buy their homeopathic remedies and then come back, which isn't very far, but that's what they had to do. I don't believe it's changed in Holland. I think it's still the same. But this was sort of... so we had a 3-year trial on this, and the next year, I think after this, we actually hired some guy with a great big tractor and a great big sprayer, and of course running through these little streets of these European cities didn't really work, and he charged the earth. So the sort of physical phenomena of carrying on the spraying wasn't really possible. And of course by the 3rd year Monsanto was wanting to get in on the action, and the guy that was running the Parks Department was sort of on our team and started blocking Monsanto, which started to sort of create an awful lot of political sort of activism. And that was the point I realised that, here's this homeopathic thing challenging the status quo, and so I was quite happy for the whole thing to just quieten down and me to leave and go home. But in the meantime, we got good results, and one of the problem with all these trees, of course, is they've got asphalt right up to it, and it's a sandy soil, so there's lack of humus, lack of water, lots of stress. Where we had trees in open paddocks on farms, we actually rehabilitated those trees pretty much totally. You could tell by bud size. The buds got very, very small. The buds came back to normal size, the bark regenerated, and the trees basically got on with normal growth. So we achieved that where the environment was okay. We did show some benefit on these trees, but in a way this was the most amazing sort of result. And this was outside the Parliament buildings, but it was also outside the palace. We were doing this big tree outside the palace. Same happened, same thing. So that was fun. Now this is a 5-year-old cabbage, and it's really just showing how we can keep that etheric activity rolling and keep it growing, and stop it going off to seed as well, so that it stayed in that leafing process. That was that one really.
What did you do to it to...
Well, we used both sort of an etheric stimulus and that zero-in product which stops flowering, holds that, remember the celery that holds that sort of seeding process back? We used both of those, so we was holding back the seeding and blowing up the leaf. And
you are harvesting those every year?
oh yeah, like there's a pretty big cabbage here, and you know, some would go off, but I don't know if you can see all the stems here. There's quite big stems there that are just running, and they just shoot off and grow. And we still do this at home. You know, I've got sort of 2-year-old cabbages with sort of 4 cabbages about that size. You know, which is all you really need for 2 people. You don't really want big cabbages. So I'm just looking at how I can have this sort of cabbage hedge and just keep harvesting cabbages, you know. Well, this one got to a big size. It just shows the process, really. This was actually the first trials I ever did. And what are we looking at there? This is actually, you can't see it, but there was a running water under here. It was a heavy yellowy clay, and we had a sort of drain pipe coming out of the wall behind us. And so the water was literally free running here. And the main thing is the slugs. You know, there's no slugs or snail damage on any of this stuff. And we don't have slugs or snail problem. You know, we're on a clay soil, no slugs or snails still. This is looking like, fruit max. So 4 months, no fruit. Yeah. So this is about 1989, and I don't know how capsicums can grow, and the capsicums don't sort of blow out. They don't fill out, and that's what we had. And so this is one of my earliest clay experiments, where we sprayed clay onto it and they just blew out. And then, you know, so many months later we did the same thing again and they just sort of filled right out. So that's a bit of that experiment there.
So what was the pest protection? What did you actually...
So basically we're using the 500 and the yarrow and the chamomile to stimulate the etheric, to push off the grubs. Because, you know, white cabbage butterfly, yes, it's an insect, but it's a grub. And so we're looking at this etheric type character. So it's an imbalance in the way the etheric's working, and those 2 preparations seem to stimulate the etheric, push off this astral, and the bugs just go. So for 10 months of the year, we basically have no cabbage problem, white cabbage butterfly. In sort of February, March, we have dry, and we're putting in our winter cabbage in late January. And, you know, Brussels sprouts, broccoli, cauliflower, all of those. And so we have this 2-month period where they can get hammered, you know. And so at that point, we spray this product. And what happens is that I don't think I have a picture of it, but what happens is that you can see some eggs laid on the plant, and you can see a little pinprick, literally a pinprick in the leaf, and then they fall off. They disappear. You don't see any big caterpillars like that at all. And what I've come to is if they germinate, if they, I don't know what you call them, burst out into a grub at night, I think they can sort of eat until the sun comes up, and then they fall off because there's no bugs there. And in the sort of heat of the summer, you just get quite a few sort of little pinpricks on your cabbage leaves, but they're not stripped, you know. And so by the end of March, they just start growing normally, so they're still in their leafing phase. And so from that point on, they just grow normal and just get the normal size, and we have a harvest. So we are, you know, suffering these little pinpricks, but we're not stripping the plant. So that's how that one works at this point.
So you're making these BD preparations in a commercial thing, like selling them.
Yep,
Yep.
yep.
Yeah.
Now,
So you can't actually like just put them all together and spray them out. It won't work. It's got to be.
no. We've got them all together as our Aetherix 1000 product, which is like your soil activator product, and we do that. And
you won't get the results. You get
yes, funnily enough, yes.
Yeah.
That we basically use that as a general spray, and I'm pretty slack, so it might be once 2 months, once 3 months maybe, and but I will spray that onto the cabbages. When I plant them out, I have a bottle of this Aetherix 1000, all the preparations. I just put 2 capfuls into 10 litres of a watering can, and when I've planted it all out and I tend to mulch it, I just water the watering can like that. And that will generally do it. It'll stop. We don't have any slug damage whatsoever, and we'll have slugs in the beds, they're there, but they don't eat the plants, and it will generally do that cabbage problem that I'm talking about. But if it doesn't, then I'll actually spray this other Aetherix 7 product, which is more the 500 and the chamomile yarrow. So it's more specific. But the Aetherix 1000 generally does it most of the time.
I just asked that question because we're trying to simplify
Yeah.
biodynamics. So the more we get niche, the harder it is for people to do it.
Yeah, but as I say, I reckon we'll get it down to probably 6 products will do everything. And that soil activator come Aetherix 1000 does a lot of stuff. It goes a long way. Sorry?
Will it do grasshoppers?
Well, this is where I to some degree it will, but like green shield beetles, for example, is a beetle, and it does those. I would be a bit inclined to see, you are dealing with a stronger light and warmth process there, and that's why I would be a bit inclined to see just how much you might need to use the stinging nettle with yarrow. So, you're moving up the layer a bit, and it's literally grubs and flying insects, beetles, So that's your sort of scale. And so, as you're going into this harder shells, all those things that got an exoskeleton, that's really talking about more light and warmth. And of course, once, grasshoppers are really hot, dry time, aren't they? So look at your environment, what time of year, what's that? That's the quality of that bug. And in a sense, that's where you move up that scale, and you're using the yarrow and singing nettle rather than the chamomile, because you've got to deal with the light and warmth process.